You're listening to the Business Marketing Show, episode number 20, part 1 of 2. You can find us at businessmarketingshow.com or on iTunes.
Welcome to the Business Marketing Show. I am Brendan from the Search Engine Shop. I'm here with my co-host Ed K. Smith from Online Impact. How are you, Ed?
I'm very good, Brendan. How about yourself, mate? And we have someone extra super duper special today with us.
We do. Our second guest star on the show.
Yes. Who's also related to the first guest star.
Yes,
special
that's very
person.
True. That's a good point.
And who is it?
It's Elisa Reed from A Little Ray of Sunshine Business Consultants.
Yay! Hello,
Hi,
Lisa.
Hi, guys. What a wonderful introduction.
Yes.
You guys crack me up.
Yeah, that's our job. There's no point
We're
doing
working on
any
the
of this.
introduction.
Yeah,
it's a work in progress.
Yeah, this is only podcast number 20 odd, so we're still getting there. We've still got a lot.
21.
I think
21. It could be 21. Yeah, it could be 21. So welcome, Lisa. Thank you for coming on the podcast. Great to have you. We'll have a bit of a history about.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. How we know you, and so I'll let Brendan go first because he's known you for much longer than I have. So
Yes. So I've known Lisa since 2004, I think, maybe even 2003, when in another life, pretty much, when I was running my IT business and online store. And I think at the time, Lisa, we had hired. So I want to talk to you about this because I see this with other businesses I work with and friends as well. And this is something you taught me about. When businesses get to a certain size and the business outgrows the business owners, they have this kind of knee-jerk reaction that they need to hire a general manager or a CEO to run the business. And we at the time, so our business grew from $1 million to $6 million in a year, and we thought we needed a CEO. But in reality, and that's one of the things you taught me, that the business had outgrown us and what we knew and our skills, and that was the wrong move. And through whatever twist of fate, we ended up coming across you and hired you as a business consultant, which was like the difference it made within 3 months to the business was like night and day. I remember that at the time. So you're a business consultant, right? That's how you explain what you do. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And honestly, that term, I was talking to somebody about this yesterday. That term didn't exist when I started in business. There was a choice when I started. I could be called a management consultant, which most people would associate with the bigger consultancies, or a tax accountant, and tax isn't my thing. I can do business tax, but it's not my thing. And I take my hat off to all tax accountants. They're incredible, keeping up with all the changes. But yeah, so I chose to call myself a business consultant because I wanted to work with business people and really be an advisor to them. And so I've been using that term for 10 years. And Brendan, interestingly, now a whole heap of people on the websites or on the internet use that term. Which
I know. This is my first question because I remember at the time, and I know you have this frustration with marketing consultants and all sorts of other people calling themselves business consultants. And a lot of people have started calling me a business consultant, and I'm like, and because of that, I'm very clear. I'm like, I'm not a business consultant. I'm probably the closest I could get is maybe a technology consultant, but yeah, that's not what I do.
It's a bit like the architecture argument. You know, there's a lot of technology people that are calling themselves solution architects, and the architects really hate that because it's a term that really is designated for their profession. But yeah, you're right. So I guess from a business perspective, I like to think of business consultants as people that are pretty seasoned or well-heeled in all aspects of business. So not just marketing and sales. And when I first started in business, there were a lot of business coaches who predominantly had fairly strong marketing and sales skill sets, but really no commercial skill sets, so very limited knowledge in terms of financial procurement, internal control. And I think now the market's developed to a point where it is more healthy. You know, there are providers that call themselves business consultants that have a broad business skill set. So that pleases me greatly. I'm still very dubious. I definitely ask 21 questions whenever somebody comes into the market and calls themselves a business consultant.
Well, that's a very good question. So what does classify someone as a business consultant? What are those questions that you ask people? Because there may be people listening to this who think they're dealing with a business consultant, but technically they're not really a business consultant. So what sort of questions would you ask, Lisa?
Yeah, very good question. Ed, you know, it's interesting. There's no defined job role, I guess. So for me, I always look for somebody that is really well heeled from a commercial perspective. I think that's the most important thing. If you're a business owner, you've put your life on the line and you're growing a business and other people are relying on you, you know, potentially your employees, suppliers. You need to make sure that commercially you're sound, so you've got a platform for growth.
Yeah.
And so when I talk about commercial, I'm always thinking, you know, from a whole business process point of view. So if you're marketing and you're selling, you want to make sure the way that you're selling is profitable. You want to make sure the way that you collect money means that you've actually got a healthy cash flow. So the financial aspect right through your end-to-end process should be fairly sound. And we even think about, you know, how we purchase suppliers and how we engage suppliers, and that whole approach really needs to be quite strong. And for me, that's where I usually start. And a lot of businesses are grown without that discipline, I guess, because it's not something that you do learn unless you've been able to access a mentor who says to you right from day one, this is how you need to do it, and it's black and white. And for me, it is black and white.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of businesses that exist based on pure luck, I think. And you know, we've had recent conversations of different companies that exist that aren't using any sort of technology in terms of bookkeeping or, you know, simple things like that, and they're still using manual ledgers. And that sort of information, if they're not told that, then they don't know. It's sort of what you don't know. So
yeah, it's pretty incredible. There are some amazing mathematicians who still do a lot of their calcs in their heads. So that's definitely possible, but it's just the slow way these days.
Yeah, and it's not leaving anything systematized so someone can step in and take over. If it's all in someone else's head, or only one person knows how to do it in the company, then that's a bad idea. So what else would you ask?
Well, you just led into the next point. I always look at who the key people are in the business, and one of the big things that limits a business is key person reliance. So from a risk point of view, we always look at who has responsibility in terms of the daily, weekly work for the critical tasks in a business. And we ask what would happen if that person decides to take long service leave or wins lotto and isn't around for 3 months. What happens to the business? And most businesses aren't protected. So, you know, that's one of the first places we start. We work out how we can actually mitigate that key person reliance. And more often than not, it's going to be the business owner.
Yeah.
And they haven't thought about that. They're conscious of it, but they really haven't thought about what their action plan is. And so that's a really big thing that we'd work on too.
Cool.
Wow, I like that. Key person reliance. Because I have that in my mind a lot because I deal so much with technology. We have single source dependency and single system dependency, but yeah, that's a good reminder that it's not just technology and software and systems, but people too, right?
Yeah, massively people. My perspective is that business is pretty much people and performance, like 90% of it's people.
Yeah.
So it's augmented and supported by, you know, the toolkits that we put together, but it's pretty much people. So business owners have to be people or almost psychologists, honestly.
Yeah, I'd agree with that because I remember when there was a tipping point when we got over, the IT company, when we got over 10 staff, you got to the point where you were like a counselor, and I called it like running a daycare for adults, but which is a bit harsh. But it was like you had to counsel these people, and when we got to 20 people, it was like someone was having a fight with someone else, someone was upset at someone else. Then there was always one person sick and one person on holidays. It really was like you were this counselor for all these people, and I was in my early 20s. It was like I was one of the youngest people.
Yeah.
And you know what? That's what I love about what I do. I honestly love those conversations. I really enjoy them. And our consult room's set up with 4 deep leather chairs that you can sit in. You can't lie in them. I think if we actually had a couch you could lie on, we'd probably be in trouble. But yeah, those conversations I find are just the conversations that actually give me great joy. I had a fellow in, a new business owner. He left his employment 2 weeks ago. He's basically starting a business and looking to acquire one. And I had him in on Wednesday for the first time. And it was such a great session. He was the most amazing guy. He is really well thought out in terms of his approach, but he needed a high-level sounding board. This guy's left a high-level job. So he's a pretty switched-on guy. He actually came to his appointment in a beautiful, shiny, soft-top black Porsche. And so he's a pretty switched-on fellow. You know, that said to me that he knows what he wants and he's pretty directed. Mm-hmm. And it was a real privilege to be, you know, his first sounding board as he starts in business. So I love those conversations. So obviously that one was a positive. There can definitely be tough conversations too, but I like those as well.
Nice.
Conversations, Lisa. Always. So, now, this is great that you've got this change coming along and started as of 1st of October. So
I know. So exciting.
It's very, very exciting. By the time people listen to this, that will have passed a little bit because we've got a few episodes in the bag that were coming out before. But I think in terms of what you used to do, and that's how I got to know you, was through your previous business, Business Balance. And we did a lot of workshops together for small business and through the Chamber of Commerce and
Fremantle Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah, and Oz Industry, federal government, Oz Industry, lots of funded stuff. Yeah. And I actually started talking to you completely by accident because I called a wrong number. And so
that's crazy.
And
that was the weirdest, wasn't it?
Sorry?
That was just the universe, I reckon.
That was the universe, yeah. And you just happened to be going down the process of setting up these workshops, and I had been thinking about doing exactly the same thing. And anyway, it was one of those very weird and wacky things that happen. And I think of all the ways that could not have happened, the very fine threads that connect us all. It's pretty freaky. But so that's how I knew you, through Business Balance. But so you've had a major mindset change of what you want to do. So what came about in your thinking that you said, I'm going to move from what I've been doing for the last 10 years to doing something completely different? A pivot is what we were talking about before.
So the new business, you haven't mentioned the new business name yet, Ed. So
haven't I mentioned? I thought you did. A Little Ray of Sunshine.
We did at the start before the intro.
Okay. Sorry, yeah. So it used to be called Business Balance, and now it's called A Little Ray of Sunshine. Now, they are two very different names. Tell us the story about how you moved from Business Balance. And I think if a lot of people heard Business Balance, they'd probably have some sort of a guess at maybe what you did. A Little Ray of Sunshine, though, that's a different thing. So you're going down a very different path and you're using very different methods. So what were your thought processes moving from Business Balance to A Little Ray of Sunshine?
Yeah, it's a big pivot. Well, I guess it helps to know the history. So when I first started in business, one of the motivators was to maintain a life-work balance, which wasn't really possible in the corporate world and in the business that I left. While the experience was incredible growing up through a multinational company, the career path was quite mapped out and the hours were pretty major. So to be able to balance your life really didn't happen until you got to 60, and that was pretty much the projection. It didn't matter who you talked to. And so I opted out and really wanted to try and find a little space for myself. And I fell into helping businesses. Honestly, I really didn't have a plan when I left the corporate world. And through my tax accountant, fell into helping privately owned businesses. And when I registered my business name, I went back to a couple of the contacts that I had and picked up some management consulting work with corporates or publicly listed companies. So I did quite a few process improvement projects for probably the first 3 years. And on the side, I worked with privately owned businesses. And my whole approach was teaching business owners about life in terms of how you balance life with the demands of a pretty taxing, business role. And in their case, most of them pretty much lived their business, so they didn't have too much life outside of work. So that was really how I came up with the name Business Balance. For me, it was about being in business, but actually having a balance and having a life.
Yeah.
And that worked really well. For the first probably 5 years, that flavour was definitely something that was palatable in the marketplace. It's probably been less so in the last 3 to 4 years, the more that technology has come to the forefront and in terms of how we operate. So balance has become a word that definitely has negative connotations. And so there's been a lot of press, and that's definitely been in my consciousness. So I've been watching that. I guess one of the other things that happened for us is our marketplace has completely changed. And, when your marketplace changes and your customer or your client facing or customer facing, you pretty much have to change with it. So what I found was that there was less of a requirement to talk about balancing life with business. And pretty much most of the inquiries and most of the new business we get is really being that trusted advisor to business people, and that can be corporate managers, really senior corporate managers in publicly listed companies, or it can be, the owners or directors of privately owned businesses. And most of the businesses that we would work with sort of, range from typically about $1 million to about $100 million. Mm-hmm. And so you probably call them in the business world, they're probably called small caps in private business.
Yep.
And so a lot of what we've been doing in the last 3 years is really just being those trusted advisors. And so the comments that consistently came through from the clients that we've been working with is, oh my gosh, in terms of what we were doing for them, we were just a ray of sunshine. And we just kept hearing that comment time and time again. And so it sort of stuck.
Yeah, okay.
And it's very different for a business consulting firm to be called that. But I loved it. And we've definitely, it's probably more appealing to the female demographic than the male demographic. And honestly, I've probably got more male clients than I do female clients. So in their eyes, it's very quirky.
Yep.
But I think we've been around long enough now that we're able to take a risk with it. And, the more that we're out there, the more people will understand, how it came about. And for me, it's actually a beautiful name because it says something about our purpose, which is really to help illuminate paths for people. And so it's exciting. I'm really excited about it.
And it does make perfect sense when you sort of explain the reasoning behind it. So well done. And
thank you.
Lots of exciting things coming. So what else do we have on the questions for Lisa?
Well, okay, so I mentioned this before, so this is kind of a perfect segue in. So one of the first things you taught me, Lisa, is that in business you outgrow everything eventually. Well, if the business is growing, hopefully you outgrow everything eventually, or change is inevitable. So you had I can't remember how you explained it, it was 10 years ago, but you had a really succinct way of approaching that. So let's talk about that for a minute, outgrowing things and being mindful of that.
Yeah, okay. So I guess I always come from a position that a business is limited by its owner. And so I'm really quite upfront about putting that on a table when I work initially with a business owner. And sometimes that's quite confronting because a lot of people put their heart and soul and energy into growing a business. The reality is when you look at it as an observer, more often than not, it's the owner that's limiting the business. And the limitation comes from having to be involved in daily, weekly things. So when we take a slice or a view of an organisation, we look at where the activity or where the majority of the activity is. And if most of the people in an organisation are at a level that we call tactical, so their focus is daily, weekly tasks, then that's usually good.
Hmm.
Often you need to see people also working at the next level up, which is operational. And that's where the focus is more monthly, quarterly, and often a 6 month or a 12-month period out.
Hmm.
And typically that's where a business owner should sit, right? So
Yeah.
as a business grows, you move from being in the tactical and you move up into the operational. And the bigger you get, so let's say that you move from being, 5 person to 10 person, the more time you should spend in those upper levels. And there's a level above operational, which is called strategic. And that's where you're constantly looking at what's happening in the market and you always form a view about what your business is doing or the direction it's taking for the next 1 to 3 years. When businesses get caught in the growth part of a business life cycle, typically a business owner gets pulled down into the tactical.
Yeah.
So they're actually doing daily, weekly stuff. And that's one of the first things we work on is releasing a business owner from that, finding the perfect person to come in and replace them, to wear their shoes, to basically fit into a job role and be able to do whatever the business owner is doing equally well, hopefully better.
Hmm.
So that a business owner can be released and basically float up to that higher level of management. And so as a business grows, it's true that a business or a business grows around a business owner basically, and as long as a business owner can release from the daily, weekly tasks and then the monthly, quarterly, and still keep a hold on the reins, but you've got to recruit the right people that can actually do the tasks better than you.
Hmm.
And that's the trick. A lot of people will roll in like a general manager, like you talked about in your business, who has ideas and aspirations, but probably doesn't work the business the same way as you do. So
Yeah.
whenever we look at replacing business owners and the tasks that they're doing, it has to be somebody that can do that as well or better. And usually if you get that right, and it does, take a while to get it right, it's often the most challenging thing, finding the right people. But you can see business owners float up and it's just the most amazing thing to watch. And it can happen depending on where a business is in its life cycle. It can happen quite quickly. Usually we talk about change over a 3 month period minimum. It might take longer, it might take 18 months, but it's just the coolest thing to watch. I love it.
Awesome.
Yeah, snap. Now, one of the things that we often hear is people say they have a business or that they run a business, but technically they're self-employed. They don't actually really have a business, and they couldn't walk away from it, as you say, for 3 months without affecting the business. So,
Yeah.
do you find that is pretty common with a lot of people? They actually think they have a business, but technically they really don't. They're self-employed.
Yeah, and look, I would call those businesses solo freelancers.
Okay.
So
Yep.
they're basically labour hire.
Yep.
And so you live contract to contract.
Mm-hmm.
From a business perspective, really for me, you're in business the day you employ your first person
Okay.
because then you have responsibility
Yep.
and then the business is bigger than you. And that point where you make that first decision to employ a person, for me, is the signal that you can actually release to.
Yeah.
So it's a different mindset being a soloist to actually running a business that employs people. And that's, no disrespect to freelancers, because that's actually at the moment, there's an amazing influx of freelancers in the market. It's changed the whole space in the last 3 to 5 years, which is fantastic. I think it's great. More resources available for privately owned businesses, which we've never had access to before. So it's fantastic. But yeah, Ed, it's an interesting space. And look, for me, I've definitely oscillated in and out of being solo and then, growing a team to 12. And I've probably grown and shrunk 5 times now in 10 years. And it's just finding the right balance. Often it's more profitable to run a business with 5 employees than it is when you get to 20 employees. And so they're choices that you make as a business owner depending on what your vision and your direction is.
And then that's one, like for me, whenever I've felt the business was successful, and on the numbers, the numbers reflect that, business felt easy. Like if the business should feel easy, it shouldn't feel like you are spinning your wheels all day long, putting out fires. And I think some of the things you said there about pulling out of the tactical and some of those things about staff. And, when we grew our business, I was so focused. I had the wrong focus. For me, we were so focused on being bigger and better and having more staff. And, we weren't focused on profitability. And I think, particularly in that really small business space, 5 to 10 staff, there's an error in what they're striving towards. They're looking at their top line revenue numbers and not really looking at the bottom line profit numbers, that what they're putting in their pocket at the end of the day.
Yep, spot on. And I think, for freelancers, they're in the professional services space, and that's a bit different too to, product or e-commerce, retailers, which would be similar to where you were, Brendan. And the dynamics are a little different. So, if you're a freelancer, you're probably far more profitable as a one-man band than you will be if you suddenly have 5 people. So, if you're conscious of your numbers, then it's definitely, different perspective. Whereas if you're selling products, typically you'll never make enough margin if you're a one-man band selling products. You need the scale of people to actually generate more volume, more profit. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So sorry, go ahead.
Each business is a little different. It's depending on your industry.
Yeah. Okay. That brings me to my next point or question, because one of the things, and this was a mistake I made, and I see so many business owners make this mistake, is whenever they're having problems in business, their default route to, or their default person to ask questions to, is their tax accountant. And you explained to me that there's actually 3 different types of accountant, and probably your tax accountant in many cases might be the worst person to ask about business growth and some of those things about that. So I'll let you explain the 3 different, I don't know if it's changed now or, from 10 years ago, but let's talk about that. The 3 different types of accountant, and they're completely different people, right?
I'm so impressed. You're such a good student. What a memory you have.
Well, I remember our first consult, and literally like 10 minutes in, you had the whiteboard out, and I love when you get the whiteboard out. And it was like the first time, I was 23 or 24, and it was the first time I realized that business is, it is part art, but it really is it's a science and a set of best practices. And I could see straight away that you're a person who knew about the science, you knew about the best practices. And on top of that, I don't know if it's, I don't know how to frame this without coming off badly, but, a lot of guys in business, it's a lot about ego and bravo and, I'm the best. And I don't know, it's because you're not a man, but you didn't have ego. There was no real ego attached to it. It was some of that, ego that gets in the way was removed from it. And it was a real light bulb moment for me that, changed the way that I do business. And, I guess it changed my path. But yeah, I guess, that was one of the big things, like learning about those 3 different types of accountants and why that, you might be getting the wrong advice if you ask your tax guy.
Yeah, okay. Do you know what? I'm going to speak about ego first, and then I'll come back to the accountants. Ego is a big one for me, and I've just had a conversation about this in the last couple of days. So everybody needs a bit of ego. In business, it's not great to lead with ego. And given that business is pretty much all about people. The majority of the population don't deal well when they're faced with ego. So for me, it's really important for business owners, the ego gets checked. And you can check it wherever you want in the day, but it shouldn't come to work. The only time it has to come out is if you're physically challenged and it's a survival situation where you need to actually use that ego to get yourself out of a situation. In business, generally, 90% of the time, it's not needed. And one of the biggest limitations in growing a business is ego. And we talk about checking it at the door all the time. So it's a very valid point. You're right. I'm not big on ego. I do have an ego. And if I'm challenged, it'll come out. But I definitely don't lead with it. From a business perspective, when we're talking about, let's come back to accounting. When I first came out, the challenge I talked about was I had the choice of calling myself a management consultant or a tax accountant, and I can do tax, and I am a registered BAS agent, but I don't want to do tax returns. And so I started explaining to business owners that there is a difference between someone like me and basically tax accountants. And a lot of tax accountants, when I actually started consulting, were quite challenged that I was in the business advisory space. So tax accountants have traditionally always called themselves tax accountants and business advisors. Mm-hmm. And so when I did a bit of research when I started, I found that most tax accountants had never owned businesses. Most of them had never managed budgets that were, in the order of a couple of million. Mm-hmm. I'd come from a job where, I was looking after strategic plans for, a business that was in the order of billions. And not that I had full control, but I definitely was responsible for, how some of that got spent. And so my context was very different to a lot of the people that were doing the accounts for business owners who I was working with. And so what I found was often the advice I was giving them from a commercial perspective to improve their profit was conflicted with advice they were getting from their tax accountants. And so what I started doing was explaining the differences I saw it. And so there are three types of accountants. There are tax accountants, bless them, who are incredible people, and we use some amazing tax accountants for our clients who know their stuff, and I rely on them a lot. And they are fully versed with the tax legislation, and they have a complete understanding of how that tax law applies to businesses and to business owners personally. So they specialise in doing business tax returns and also individual tax returns for the business owners. So it's a very different space to an accounting space where you're responsible for preparing a profit and loss and a balance sheet and a cash flow forecast, which are the three key financial statements. And in big business, the person that prepares those three financial statements is called a financial accountant. Mm-hmm. In small business, it's called a bookkeeper, and it could be a business owner if they're doing the accounts in a handwritten ledger, Ed. But so the financial accounts, the financial accountant's responsible for those three financial reports, which ultimately the tax accountant relies on to prepare the tax returns at the end of the year. In small business, usually we have to do BAS returns, FBD returns, PAYG summaries. The financial accountant or bookkeeper, or if it's the business owner doing the accounts, will often do those too. And so we've got those two roles. And then the third role is someone like me. So my trade is management accounting. So I sit in a business and I look at how to improve end-to-end business processes, basically to make more money. So that's always my outcome or my deliverable for a business owner. If you're going to run a business, then at the end of the day, you need more money in your hand from running a business than you would have if you put it in a bank account and earned interest. So management accountants are rare in industry. You'll usually find them in big businesses in roles, business analyst roles, business advisor roles. In private enterprise, it's rare to actually find a management accountant in private practice. So that's me. And so people like me have quite sound commercial skills because we're used to the financial perspective, the procurement perspective, looking at internal controls. And we're also used to looking at process improvement and how to improve businesses to make more money. So from an accounting perspective, if you're running a business, really you would talk to somebody with management accounting skills to improve your business. You would talk to a financial accountant about preparing you 3 financial statements, and you would talk to a tax accountant about your tax returns at the end of the year. And so I typically wouldn't suggest you would go to a tax accountant for business improvement advice, but you definitely would go to them for tax planning advice.
That's pretty much exactly what you told me 10 years ago. So that's
so principles don't change, do they?
Think of a tax accountant. The other thing you said, think of a tax accountant as more like a tax lawyer. I think that's the other thing you said, rather than an accountant.
Yeah, that's true, because they basically make sure you toe the line with the law. Yeah. And it's interesting now. So a lot of the people that are in the business coaching space or the business consulting space do tend to sit in what I call the management accounting space. And that's where I'm always going to ask 21 questions about what sort of experience they have. It's not just credentials, it's actually how deep the experience is. Because if you're giving somebody business improvement advice and it's not sound commercially, then for me that's a red flag, because that's definitely going to impact your financial statements and it's going to impact your tax return too. Yeah. So as a management accountant or a business consultant or a business coach, you need to understand the financial accounting role and also the tax accounting role to make sure you're advising correctly in terms of performance improvement. Yeah.
Awesome.
I know how you feel there, because I get upset when people give strategic and high-level technology advice and know nothing about technology. So I can definitely relate there. Or they have no business giving technology advice to big business or where it has serious implications. So yeah, I think
one of the big issues we have at the moment is that people are really loose with terms, and I don't know how we got there, but I think the proliferation of information has definitely aided that. And sometimes I guess you just have to be aware.
That's half the challenge, isn't it? I mean, there's so many people who come into business not knowing 5% of the things they really need to know, and I count myself in that category. There's so many things I've learnt in 12 years of business and I still know what I feel I still know practically nothing. I mean, seriously, there's so much to learn.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. But the simplicity of people thinking in their head, just go and start a business, and what's hard about it, even though the numbers are completely stacked against them for success, it's fascinating that people don't do any research before they jump in to what they're about to do. But it's no different to any of the marketing things that Brendan and I and yourself do, is that people don't do any market research before they go into doing any, creating products or setting up advertising campaigns or a website. They sort of do everything all backwards. So there must be a sequence of things that people should follow. So if someone's thinking about going and starting a business, what are the couple of major things they need to get straight first before they even go and spend $1 on marketing, advertising, websites? What would you suggest is the most important areas to get straight first? This is the end of part 1. For part 2 of episode number 20 with Lisa Reed, you can find it on Business Marketing Show, episode number 20, part 2. You've been listening to the Business Marketing Show. You can find us at businessmarketingshow.com or on iTunes.